affordability of childcare. We know that when families and community members have access to childcare and they can look after their children or go to work and not worry about their children, they're actually valued members of our workforces, our community. We know that our social community, our community members, our community as a whole does not function if parents are at home worried about their kids or unable to afford childcare. As a young person, my parents or my friends are starting to become parents now, and something that they're looking at is affordable childcare. Right now, there is no affordable childcare, and I would actually argue that having social programs such as affordable childcare benefits our communities, and it does. That's the same reason we have public education. It benefits our communities to take our kids to school and learn, and not have to worry about paying exorbitant amounts of money to get an education or be provided for. I think one thing that our previous governments, both Liberal and DP, have done a poor job is consulting with community members. We saw this with the teacher strikes. I was actually in high school when the first teacher strike happened. There's 2,000 kids in our high school abandoned because teachers had to walk out because they weren't being paid fairly and they weren't being listened to by our government in power. And so I think something that the BC Greens are very much committed to and very much value is consulting with any affected stakeholders. We do this with doctors on the primary care crisis. We do this with other community members on other crises. And so something else that we can do is work with these childcare providers.
Thank you very much. And you did a good job there, Simran, of foreshadowing what our next question is, which is the healthcare crisis. Our current healthcare system is going through a major crisis with medical staff burnouts, non-availability of family doctors, nurses and pharmacists retiring, leaving the profession, and long emergency time waits. And nowhere are they longer than in Surrey. What steps need to be taken to get our healthcare system back on track? And let's start with Jason and Harmon, Simran and Eleanor.
Well, thank you very much. The healthcare crisis, my favorite topic, because I was the guy who stood up in 2020 and said, hold on, pump the brakes. When you take unprecedented measures, it's going to lead to unprecedented harm. Unfortunately, I am not proud of this. I wanted to be so desperately wrong. I wanted to be wrong about this. We have excess death in Canada, okay? 75% of the people who died as a result of these wicked restrictions were under the age of 45, okay? It's been a tragic loss of life. I have the NDP said, hey, we declared a state of emergency. Premier Horgan said state of emergency. And then he also added, but don't worry, we secured the supply line, the supply chain. And what has happened to our supply chain? We can't get things. Big shock, okay? I knew that was a problem then. My neighbor desperately needed a chemical reagent in order to have a cancer screening. He's a cancer survivor. He's not gonna get that test because the doctor said we can't get it because supply chain. The government has its hand on the supply chain again. Perhaps if the government were to get out of the way, we could get back to living a normal life. I talked to a nurse the other day. I'm not gonna be able to talk about the nurse too much. She had some very dark things to say about the hospital, including the fact that she's leaving before 55. It's untenable. These mandates have to stop. We have to hire back our heroes so that they can get to work doing what they do, caring for the people in our community who desperately need that care. Thank you very much.
Clearly, our current healthcare in British Columbia just isn't working. Just in this riding, we had an elderly lady that had to wait over 10 hours for an ambulance to show up. Luckily, her son was able to stay there with her while she waited. We need some serious reform, not just virtue signaling, pointing at other parties over petty politics, trying to divide all British Columbians on topics, which I feel we've had enough about. And also, the NDP wants to build a new hospital, but 162 beds is barely going to replace the medical clinics that have shut down. And there's not going to be any selected surgeries, there's maternity wards. We need a bit of everything. We need to bump that number up to at least 350 or more. And another thing too is, how are we going to staff this new hospital? Or when we can't even staff the current ones? We need to bring back the trained medical professionals that were let go due to a private medical choice. immediately. We need to get back in the business of saving lives, not playing petty politics with people's lives. I've had enough of that. And in a rich country like this is completely unacceptable. That's why I am committed to building a new hospital and working with any other government that wants to sit at the table, have constructive conversations where we can leave British Columbians with a better healthcare system than it is currently right now, which is completely unacceptable.
I will have to say, so bear with me. So first of all, our healthcare crisis, our healthcare system is falling apart. Our healthcare workers are overworked and underpaid, and there's a variety of crises going on within the overarching collapse. First of all, our ambulance wait times. Paramedics also overworked, underpaid. In rural areas, they're often being paid just about $2 an hour when they're on call. The NDP promised last summer, after the heat dome, after all the deaths we had, literally hundreds of deaths, that things would change. They promised to roll out a new scheduled on-call pay model, and they haven't done it fast enough. As we can see, people are being forced to wait for hours and hours all across our province. We have a poison drug crisis. Our government has done nothing to address that. We need a safe supply now. You cannot get people into treatment if people are dead. If you want to save lives, you need a safe supply. Our mental health services. You cannot access mental health care at an affordable rate here. I know as a student, I have my student health care plan. It's unaffordable, and if you do try and access, free or subsidized mental health care supports, which are very few and far in between here in BC, the wait times are astronomical. Our local health authorities, instead of putting money and resources towards hiring more nurses and frontline workers, we're actually hiring more local health authority workers and more admins. Again, the bureaucracy is insane. We do not need to be paying more for more local health administrators. Yeah, those are just some of the solutions. Thank you.
So when I think about our healthcare crisis, I am filled with a lot of anger because we see every day on the news that we have people who their children are dying waiting for ambulances. Like Harmon said, we had a lady in our own community waiting 10 hours on the floor with a broken hip. And multiple people have died waiting for care in this province. It's completely unacceptable. And what's even more acceptable is that the NDP have failed to come forward with a plan of how we're going to get through this crisis. But I can tell you that 48 days ago, that the BC Liberal Party did come forward with a 10-point, 30-day action plan on ways that we can get through this. Because it's easy to point fingers, but coming up with solutions is real leadership. So what we have suggested is that we do some things that will immediately ease the burden, stop doctors from leaving. We want to immediately increase the amount of pay for the cost of overhead and operating costs for family doctors. We want to expand the scope of practice for pharmacists so that they can prescribe some medications for common ailments, which will take the pressure off of our emergency rooms and family doctors. We want to increase the number of training seats at UBC and finally get the SFU Medical Campus open, and then make sure that we can expand those seats, and doing more to remove barriers from foreign trained family doctors and get people with medical training working today for you. Thank you. Answer that?
Very, very brief.
Okay, well, I can tell you that Kevin Falcon, so first and foremost, the BC Liberals have supported keeping people safe with the recommendations of our Chief Medical Health Officer. But I can also tell you that Kevin Falcon did ask the BC NDP government why they haven't followed federal mandates to allow workers to come back to work. And if they are not vaccinated and there is any risk to the public, that we could use those workers in areas where they don't come into contact with frontline employees. So the BC Liberal government has asked for us to be allowed to bring back workers who were let go during the pandemic. Thank you.
Jason, our next question is going to be on healthcare, so if you want to respond to that, you'll have plenty of opportunity. The next question is also healthcare. It relates specifically to something that at least one of you mentioned, which is the new hospital. But as I mentioned, if you want to respond to the other part in your remarks, please do so. What is your position on the new hospital location in Cloverdale, And how will you ensure that it integrates with the other health facilities network, which includes Peace Arch Hospital, and of course in our immediate area also includes Surrey Memorial, Langley, and Delta? And if you could speak to that, but if you want to speak to some of the other issues that have been raised, you're more than welcome. And we're going to start with Harmon.
With the building of the new hospital, we need to make sure, like I said before, it is adequate. We need the actual beds. We ended up with less beds now than we did before the pandemic. And how many billions of dollars have we pumped into the system? That is completely appalling to me. We need hospitals here that are set up, and the location is fine with me. But the problem is, when I hear all the solutions that I'm hearing from the BC Liberals is, well, we want to have a hospital with this and that. Well, we had the land. It was Kevin Falcon, the leader of the BC Liberals right now, who sold that land. And if we had just held on to that land, just imagine how much that would be worth in today's real estate value. We could be buying a hospital anywhere we want and building it to the full capacity. So again, that is some ignorance that was shown by the BC Liberals. And that is completely unacceptable. And the NDP can't even come here to answer this question because they know they'll be hammered on this question. They're not going to show up to the table. They know 162 beds is just a flash out there to show everyone. Look at the Patolo Bridge. That's barely even been started. They haven't built a single thing over the last almost a decade. They'll be in power, 6-7 years. And it's just ridiculous to me. It just falls on deaf ears, and it's really disingenuous to the constituents of Surrey South here when they talk about the hospital.
Yeah, so the topic of the new hospital, we absolutely need a new hospital, and it shouldn't be something that should be used for political points. Core provincial services, hospitals, schools need to be built, and they need to be built for the needs of the community now and into the future. So absolutely we need a hospital, but is 168 beds, no maternity ward, and no ICU enough? Absolutely not. I hear a lot from the Liberal Party, and I have tremendous respect for the elected MLAs that are here in this room, and they say, well, we don't like the location, we'd like to move the location. You're elected MLAs, provide a location. You're in a position where you have the ability, if you don't like the plan being presented by our current government, to give a new plan. You don't like the location? That's fine, move the location, work with your government, and this requires, of course, collaboration from the NDP who are not here tonight, which I'll give you that. And that requires collaboration from them. If we don't have enough hospital beds, if we don't have a maternity ward, we don't have an ICU, it's not going to be able to service the community, then give us an alternative location, and maybe the NDP will step up and actually say, yeah, you know what, we recognize that we need more spots and we need a full service hospital. The NDP can tell promises of a new hospital all they want, but our health service system is collapsing. We don't pay our healthcare workers enough, we're not supporting them. In order to support them, we need to revamp our system. We need mental health care that's accessible and affordable, and one way that the BC Greens want to do this is to introduce, on a trial basis, universal mental health care system, similar to what we have. Of course, this is on a trial basis, but this is one thing we can do. We need to address all the crises. Thank you.
So for 4 years, the NDP has been promising to build a second hospital in Surrey and Cloverdale. But I can tell you that they actually have had no budget, no line item in their budget for that hospital until this year, when they were hounded by the BC Liberals to actually budget some money to show that they were actually serious about building this hospital, and they only put $2 million in that budget, which I can tell you isn't probably even enough to get the drawings done. So we are committed to getting a second hospital for Surrey. We want to have that hospital built. We want to make sure we are pressuring them because we wanted to have the services that Surrey needs now. One of those things is, of course, an ICU. We want to have a maternity ward, and we want it to be more than 168 beds. We've heard from the NDP, they said, oh, that's not what you need right now. But I have met with people from Fraser Health that told me that there are already 1,200 births over capacity at Surrey Memorial Hospital, and they're always on diversion, which means that we're sending people to other communities to have their children. So we are committed to having the hospital, regardless of the misinformation by the NDP that they are spreading. We will see this hospital built in Surrey. And they have committed to you, they have promised you that they will have shovels in the ground next year. And if that's the case, we don't have to worry about it being moved. But I can tell you this, a promise isn't worth anything unless you can get it done.
Eleanor, that was very well scripted. Your campaign people are fantastic. Keep up the good work, guys. You're doing a great job. Politicians are always promising things. They want to build you things. The people who create the problem are then the ones who are going to borrow a bunch of money, take our money, borrow, and then build something and say, we're going to do this with your money, and it's going to be great. The fact of the matter is, each one of these candidates up here has pointed out the fact that, it's okay, you can turn it out. The fact that the hospitals, the medical system right now is failing. We cannot manage the system we have. So how about we do a better job there, starting there? I do not agree with the other candidate who said, hey, let's let the unvaccinated come back to work and we'll segregate them. We know how that story ended up at another time in history. We do not stand for any sorts of segregation of any kind. We now know that this novel gene therapy does not stop transmission or infection, period. End of story. Let's stop this noise. We all know that. It's not a secret. Secondly, open competition. We need beds. Let's let entrepreneurs come out. Let's let private money come in and provide those beds and provide those hospitals. And we stand for legalizing your right to choose between public and private. We stand for your right to choose between public and private. That would alleviate the problem of the beds and the staffing shortages. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your answers on those health care questions. We're going to change topics and go to the topic of agriculture land. South Surrey is home to a significant amount of agriculture lands, which is unique in a sprawling urban city. What will your government do to ensure that this land is protected? This question, we're going to start with Simran, then Eleanor, Jason, and Hartman.
Yeah, so we know more than ever that agricultural land is so important, and we saw what happened last year when we faced the climate crisis in Abbotsford and saw hectares and hectares of farming land flooded and lives destroyed and communities destroyed. It's really interesting that we just had that crisis happen in fall 2021, yet the NDP is continuing to move forward with the Site C Dam project, which is going to be flooding hectares and hectares of arable agricultural land. We know more than ever, moving into a climate crisis, we need to be supporting our farmers, and one way that the BC Green wants to do this, especially here in Surrey South, but across the province, is that they have a plan to allocate funding and money towards research on ways that we can adapt our farmers and our agricultural land reserves to the climate crisis. That's one way that we can support them heading into the future. The climate crises are here now, and they're gonna keep happening. Another thing that we can do is support agricultural workers and support farmers here in the Lower Mainland and across the province. We can do this by, one, supporting buy local, and also by, like I said, supporting the retention and procurement of agricultural land here in the Lower Mainland, and this is specific to Surrey South. I think honestly the most important thing though is to recognize that we're facing climate crises. We might face flooding again this fall. We had a fire season, and we're running out of land to protect, and so what we need to be focused on is not destroying the land that we have that is agricultural and protecting what we do. Thank you.
So I visited many farms. I've been off work now and campaigning since early May, and I've been to many farms in Surrey South, and it's been tremendous. You know, what I'm hearing from farmers is that they actually have less rights now under the NDP than they previously had before 2017, which includes they've removed their ability to talk directly to the ALR. Farmers have less control over what they do on their own land. And as a BC Liberal government, we would be supporting farmers. We are really wanting to make sure that we can keep farming viable. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to put forward, when our gas prices started going up, that we wanted to be able to temporarily suspend the carbon tax and to make gas more affordable, because it's actually the unaffordability right now of things like fuel on a family farm, their inability to add housing for workers, their inability to get labor to their farms that is making farming unsustainable. We're committed to protecting their land, but we also need to make sure that we're protecting them as business people. They need to be able to make a living, to make sure that the farms that we have here in Surrey that are part of the fabric of Surrey South can be protected now and for generations to come. Thank you.
I also want to point out that I also agree with a lot of what you say, Harmon, and you say it with a lot of passion. So I want to thank you for your stance as well. On this issue on agriculture, I'm going to read the response I wrote in the Peace Arch News. Thank you for publishing it. Let farmers do what they do best, farm. Farmers, by the very nature of their business, have the most to gain by farming in a way that sustains the land, which grows the very product that they sell. Basic economics, something that's forgotten in this government, unfortunately, necessitates minimum fertilizer usage. Radical fertilizer reduction goals set by an outside bureaucratic entity. I'll stand up so you can see me in the back. A bureaucratic entity, an outside bureaucratic entity, is leading to food shortages, will lead to food shortages, rapidly rising prices, and plunge families into poverty and ultimately starvation. My neighbors who have immigrated from Asia, India, UK, Europe, Central and South Americas, I'm sorry if I left you out, can attest that history is a precedent. I stand by our farmers and neighbors who warn no farmers, no food. Lastly, my community and I are also concerned about the libertarian community and I are also concerned about farm crops and drinking waters being contaminated by the BC government plan permitting massive, large-scale spraying of herbicide on our forests to kill leaf-bearing trees. Thank you very much.
About the farming community, we really need to go in and start thinking about our farmers. Because right now, they're under attack. With this new 30% fertilizer ban, the hypocrisy, I hear it. We all want what's best for the environment. We all do. In my industry, we've made drastic changes. But the thing is, actuality is, when you reduce 30% of the fertilizer, you're gonna need 30% more land. And you're gonna need more fuel for that. So aren't those emissions? And that's another hypocrisy that no one wants to bring up is the fact that every single farming equipment needs fossil fuels just about. And we need to scrap the carbon tax to make it more affordable for them. 25 cents a liter is way too much. And a lot of farmers are telling me their yields are down. They have bug issues. So if it's non-arable land, we need to work with them, help them have storage facilities, maybe create some housing like Eleanor mentioned for their workers. These are all ideas that we can do to help farmers, but we need to actually sit down at the table and ask them and talk to them and see what their actual concerns are. Because a lot of their concerns aren't being talked about. Having a blueberry farm takes you $25,000 to $30,000 an acre to invest. You don't see your returns on that. It used to be 2 to 3 years, now you're looking at 5 to 6 years. And the yields are at an all-time low due to the bug issues, which no one wants to talk about. The machines to solve those issues are $1 million a pop.
Thank you very much.